Hi, everybody. Welcome to our episode in the Lessons from the Game podcast. And we got an unbelievable guest with us today, Hanyani Shimange. He played for some unbelievable teams like the Sharks, the Cheetahs, the Stormers. Unfortunately, not for the Bulls, but that's another topic. He played for South Africa. But enough said, Shimmy, brother. Welcome to our show with my co host, Ben Pegner. How you doing, brother?
No, I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, school just started off in Cape Town, so getting back into the routine, the traffic's back, but probably the best time to be in Cape Town because the streets are a lot quieter now during December. Gee, you'd have been here and you also would have been here, but a lot of people sort of come down to the coast on holiday, so it sort of quietens down now. A lot of foreign tourists here, but it's a good place. I enjoy living here. Luckily, the school's down the road. My daughter's school's down the road. And I've got flexible hours, so I can actually go pick her up, drop her off, and then enjoy Cape Town, especially this time of the year. 30 degrees here on a day like this, so I might go to the beach a little bit later.
Yeah, it's freezing cold. It's the winter. It's -3. My windscreen is frozen. Living the life. It seems like you're still living the life, man. Nothing has changed your side.
I know, hey. Let's talk in June, July when it starts raining here. Maybe then I'll
Okay.
be complaining a lot. Yeah,
Ben, how
yeah.
you doing, brother? What's news your side?
Good, G. Yeah, exactly the opposite to Shimmy, battling through, an English winter, but exciting. They named the England and the Six Nations squads yesterday from a rugby point of view, and so people are talking. It seems like that's come around quick. Loads going on. Obviously, the European games, just been taking place this last weekend as well. Loads going on. I'm coaching again later on today, this afternoon, all good, man. Excited to get Shimmy on.
All right. Okay, great stuff. We won't talk too much about the European games. We had a tough one on the
Had to mention it,
weekend.
G. Like you've brushed it up until now.
Oh,
So
no, no, no,
you're like,
it's breaking up. Let's move on. Let's move on. I'll never got a certain amount of data which I purchased for this call. No, I'm joking. All right. Show me. Ben and myself, we are passionate about so many topics, and the goal of our podcast is to inspire and also to have a bit of a laugh. But to start off with a serious note, the game of rugby has given us all so much, and we've all learned some valuable lessons. But what is one of the lessons that you can share with our audience that you have learned in the game of rugby, which you can pass on to the new generation?
For me, it's pretty basic. If it's, you sacrifice a lot, but if something means a lot to you and it means enough, then you'll always work hard for it. Just finding out what you want. I think when you play rugby in a privileged position, you get a lot of kids. You turn around and say, "I want to play for Province," and if you have that, or "I want to play for the Springboks," and if it means enough for you, you'll sacrifice a lot. I never thought myself. We met in Bloemfontein as a school kid. I never thought I'd end up playing for Free State purely because but because I wanted to make it, I was so desperate to get that to achieve that goal. You actually sacrifice a lot in terms of that. And it comes down to anything, a lot of people have sort of goals for the new year and all of that. I just believe that if you want something bad enough and it means enough for you, you'll be willing to work hard for it. It's just finding out how much it means to you and how far are you willing to drive yourself.
Yeah, we'll get stuck into this Bloemfontein stories in a bit. There's lots of lessons to be learned there.
hey, Shimmy, how did you end up? No, I actually would love to know that now, G, because I know that I think you went to Rondebosch, didn't you? Were you
Yes.
brought up in Cape
Very
Town?
posh school.
What's that? Was
It's
I
a
brought up in
posh,
Cape Town?
posh
Yeah.
school.
Yeah. It's not posh. It's the great Rondebosch. You gotta put the great before you say Rondebosch. Look, I was, so it's interesting. I was born up in Limpopo in the northern province. And then I was in boarding, so I left home at 5 years old. I went to boarding school in Joburg. So I was a boarder from when I was 5. My
Wow.
house was my parents lived about 5 hours away. Then my parents relocated to Cape Town because my dad was a doctor, so he specialized in Cape Town. So I ended up leaving Joburg boarding house to go to Cape Town. So that's how I ended up at Rondebosch. So I only started playing rugby when I was 13 years old. I didn't know all the Joburg schools played football then. And then you sort of learned your rugby in high school. So I got to Cape Town at boarding house, and they said I said, "Okay, guys, it's rugby season. What position should I play?" And the guy said, "Prop." Oh, no, they said you're definitely going to play in the forwards. And in football, the forwards are the strikers. So I thought, okay, this is pretty cool because I was a back. I was actually a back in football. I played left back or right back, at the back defensively. So they said, rugby, no, you're going to play in the forwards. I thought, oh, okay, gee, that's quite nice. Thinking football, the striker, this and that. I put into prop and I never left the front row. So I always played. So I was part of the front row and I never left. So played loose head, tight head throughout my whole school career, a bit of hooker. And then once I left school, that's when I moved to hooker because I was just physically, I wasn't big enough to, imagine me trying to scrum Guthrie and all these big boys there.
Some big
I'd have been
units.
killed. So I
Yeah.
was a lot safer at hooker. I was a lot safer at hooker. So that's why I ended up in Cape Town. And then that's where my love for rugby came. I was a ball boy at Newlands, I think, for Province when I was about 10, 11 years old. Used to go down and watch a lot of the Province games. And I always said I want to play for Province purely because of my love for rugby there. I had three things. I wanted to play for Province and for UCT and the Springboks. And I managed to achieve all of those all along the line.
That's awesome. That's awesome
Yeah.
to hear that. I've just remembered I actually did get a couple of guest coaching sessions at Rondebosch a long time ago when Sean Povey was coaching there. Do you remember Sean Povey?
Yeah, I remember him. Yeah,
Former Province.
I hope the boys were all mannered. Yeah, they were very well mannered.
Yeah. So that was, and then
That's a great school.
And then you got on the train to Bloem.
Yeah, no. Then I went afterwards. Then I went I ended up going to University of Pretoria because my parents moved back. But I actually played. I was in the Bull system. I played for Takis. I think I played 1 or 2 games for Blue Bulls. It used to be what do they call it? The president team, which was like the Currie Cup B team. And I was 20 years old, and then that's when
you stayed in the fight, man. Should have stayed in the fight.
I played SA under 21s, and then we ended up winning the World Cup. And then that's when I moved to professional rugby. In between that, I'd done a gap year in the UK up north. So then I came back. Then I got what happened then? I got signed by the Bulls. No, signed by the Sharks, sorry. And then went to the Sharks. I was there for 2 years. But then there was this guy called John Smith who played the same position as me. So I sort of knew then that you could see then he was. I mean, John was a schoolboy superstar. Played hooker. He's going to be Sharks captain. So I thought to myself, let me just give myself a go in Free State and see how it goes. And I think after the first or second year in Bloemfontein, I made the Springbok squad. So it was a decision I made, but I'd also give myself a timeline in terms of let me give this a full go. Otherwise, I can go back to full-time studying. So that's when the rugby really kicked off for me, possibly in Bloemfontein. Sharp was great for me. Introduction to professional rugby, good environment. But Bloemfontein is where I started to make my mark.
Shimi, you spoke just about the Springboks. That was one of your goals, and I played with you. We were roommates, and we had some great times. We'll dig deep into those stories in a bit, but and I've always admired you for your mindset. You just mentioned you played a guy behind John Smith, and he was our Springbok captain, and you found yourself being on the bench for your whole Springbok career, if I'm not mistaken. You had 9 test matches, and there were 12 test matches. You were in the 22 or the 23, but you didn't go on. So what intrigues me is that you always gave it your all at training. You always worked hard. You never went into a comfort zone and took things for granted. You always pitched up for team. But how did you experience that back then? Because I obviously backed you as a player. I felt you deserved some more game time at that level. But what was your mindset back then, and how did you experience it?
Yeah, look, my thing was that I always had to keep training hard purely because what I didn't want to do is when the opportunity came that I wasn't ready for it. So that was always my mindset. Look, I always knew that, without getting a lot of minutes or game time, you had to do the extra fitness, the extra hard work. So when that opportunity came, whether it was to win a game or to come on or do something special, then you realize that the chance was there. But also Jake was pretty honest with me from the beginning. He said I'd have the hardest role in the squad, in terms of playing behind the captain. He had a vision for John as being the great Springbok captain, which he ended up being one of the most successful captains of all time. So I was the guy behind it. But then there was also 20 other hookers behind me, and I realized that if I don't up my standards, if I don't train hard, I'll be the third hooker sitting in the pavilion, and that's what I didn't want. So it was tough at times. Sometimes you, like every rugby player, you want to get on, then you don't really have a bomb squad per se where you use the bench off that much. But I always just thought to myself, don't drop my standards. Let me support John. We're good mates now. We're good mates then. And that was it. So that's when you have to sacrifice a lot. You have to be unselfish, but also you have to believe in the values of what the Springboks say. It's not a right to be there. It's a privilege and an honor. And that's it. So that's the reality. And if that was my time and my role, that's what I had to fulfill. And I've got no regrets around it. Obviously, you turn around. If I had played in 80 caps, chances I'd be sitting here saying, shucks, I would have liked to get to 100 or whatever it is. But if that was my role, that was my role. And I enjoyed my time there with the Springboks.
That's awesome, Shimmy. The other day, actually, I was watching a Tom Brady documentary, and they were talking about the backup Drew Bledsoe. And it suddenly just reminded me, when you were talking like that, it just reminded me of that. And G and I have spoken quite a bit about people understanding their roles, understanding their strengths. It seems to me straight away you understood, like, my role here has changed. What my aspirations maybe are slightly different. My goal, the role I have to play to stay in this environment is a bit different now. Yeah, what was that like for you? Was that because that's sometimes it's hard to put the team first in that respect, isn't it? And go, actually, I've got a different path now. But it's not maybe what I dreamt about for the last, I don't know how many years, 20 years.
Yeah, look, I suppose for me, the Springbok thing was different. What I struggled with, what was quite tough, was sometimes you go on being on the bench against the All Blacks, but you can't start a Currie Cup game because, you've been away from that system long enough. So for me, I found that, okay, a week ago, you're about to play the best team, the two best teams in the world, England were very good then. You're sort of sitting on the bench behind that. But then you go back to the provincial setup because you've been out so long. So then that sort of compounds. Then you're like, shucks, when am I going to get game time? I need to start playing a bit, Yeah. So that's what probably that was probably the most frustrating thing in terms of that. And then eventually I wasn't playing enough, and then I lost my Springbok position. That's purely because maybe from a provincial point of view, I didn't have the support, enough support in terms of, you're not in the Springbok mix, you're not playing, but come back to province or come back to Free State or whatever, get into the starting lineup and get some minutes back in, whereas the other guys are performing and they've been seen. And then we had really good hookers. So it was myself, John, I think, Donnie Couture, South Brits was around, and he was up and coming. Bismarck was up and coming. Chili Boy was there. I think Gary Botha was there, so I forgot Gary's name. So there was a lot of good hookers around. So you almost needed to be playing. If you weren't playing for the Springboks, you needed to be performing for your province. And then that sort of started to dip. So it worked against me. But look, it is what it is. The reality is I enjoyed my time with the Springboks. And that role for me was the role. John played, I think he played, over 100 tests, and he started, I think he started over 100 of them. So there's always someone behind him, in terms of that. So that was the role for that sort of generation. But, as long as you talk about, the thing is, the values of any team is sacrifice, all of that, but you got to live those values. And, it's like people say you must sacrifice for the team. And I felt like if I do that role well, and, that's my position, and I'll stand by it. So I enjoyed it.
I think, Shimi, you touch on a very important topic there in terms of your role. And I think, firstly, I want to say this to you as a former teammate. You had a massive impact in my career, starting from a young age, the cheetahs, from our sandwiches at the sandwich shop, then the Cokes and the chocolates for our video sessions, and PlayStation with Tepo Kokali. You had a massive impact. And even, I remember, I'll never forget, was Sydney in Manly, if I'm not mistaken. We had a big night out, and you just woke me up and said, "Gee, let's go run." And we took on those hills, that long hill, and I was struggling, and you were just running.
That was in Coogee.
That was in Coogee.
I remember that hill.
Coogee. But and we've seen this now with the Springbok setup as well, the current Springboks, and the constant rotation. And we saw a guy like Andre Pollard taking a back seat in the beginning, Mani Libbok's playing, and there are so many other different examples. A guy like Kobus Reinach that gets pulled out of the starting lineup. And I think the importance of your role in a team, we tend to undervalue sometimes the importance of the non-playing reserves or the bench players, because without a strong squad set of values and guys working in the same direction, it can be disruptive for a team. I don't know what's your take on that in terms of the Springbok setup, the roles of certain players.
Yeah, I think the Springboks, I mean, the last year was quite a unique year. I think what Rassie did was extremely smart. If you think about it, if you're a new cap this year, between now and the next World Cup, there's probably about 30 games, which is one club season. So if you're going to cap a guy, what you don't want to do is go in a World Cup, especially with the squad the Springboks have got now, with guys with just under 10 caps going into a World Cup and the pressure. So now, by building depth now with sort of a lot of older players, the guys that are coming through will have 30, 40 caps by the time they get to the World Cup. So you've got the experience, and it's been proven that to win a World Cup, you need experienced players, you need guys that have been there. So that's what Rusty's done though in this year. So I think it's incredibly smart. It's unique, he sort of innovated in terms of, you haven't seen a lot of it in World Rugby, but he's got a long runway also. And I think because the plan has probably been communicated well to the powers that be, he's been given the room to cap these players to go ahead, and the vision and the plan is there. And he's already now, if you look at the South African stair setup, I'd probably say he's a step ahead of any other team from what they've done. And I know I've been around that Springbok team, since 2018, or 18 was my first tour. And there is absolute raw clarity there. Every guy knows what's needed. I think they do all they want. They don't have one-on-one. Everything's said in front of the whole team. So everybody knows what's being said. They set a high standard. I think if you're not going to work in the Springbok team, if you're not going to buy into the vision, you're not going to be aligned. I don't think you'll last very long there, because the reality is that it's not about the individual. It's about everybody working together to get the right outcome. And that's what they've managed to get right.
Hey, Shimmy, I'd love to know, so, when you were talking before about your experience, and the role that you played, it just sounds like it's a bit cliche, but like a champion's mindset. And the podcast is called The Lessons from the Game, because we're trying to help aspiring players, aspiring coaches, but also just regular people who are just trying to, level up and do their best in life and fulfill their potential in whatever they do. And that mindset that you demonstrated, and I reckon from the outside, you have also demonstrated it as you've transitioned out of the game into your next career. You've seen, it's not a coincidence that you've now been successful in this next career, in this next chapter. Is that mindset? Where did you get that from? Because understanding your role and then fulfilling your role, and what you talked about at Province, staying motivated must have been quite hard for you at times, I guess. And feeling like not persecuted or feeling poor me, but just going again and again and again and sustaining it. What's been your keys to that?
Look, I have no idea. It's a good question. That I don't know. You think about it. I mean, I grew up. I mean, I left home at 5 years old. So it's not a.
Yeah.
It's not. It's just. That's my reality. I left home at 5 years old. I was at boarding house. You got to make new mates. You got to get on with people. You got to compete. You got to learn how to look after yourself. Provincially, I left. I sort of moved around a bit. You go to Bloemfontein. You got to meet other people. I met you there. You go to the Sharks. You got to walk into a new change room. I didn't go to school there. You got to meet other people. So the whole time, you got to almost not try to prove yourself, but you got to get on. You got to understand what's needed. You got to work hard, and that's probably it. I think about it from that point of view. I've always enjoyed. One thing I've always enjoyed. I like being part of a team. I also enjoy a challenge, and that's it. So I still try to train, probably not as hard as I used to, but I still enjoy it. And I enjoy the effort that comes, or the success, or that comes from working hard, from trying to dream about doing something and actually executing it. So I've always enjoyed that aspect of it. And that's probably, I don't know whether it's a personality trait or anything, but it's something that I've always enjoyed.
Shimmy, we spoke about your career and what you brought and the value you added to the team. And we don't talk enough about this, is that transition period. And today you're a rugby analyst, and I must say I'm enjoying it. Right, clearly see that Rondebosch boy's accent pulling through there in this. All right, I honestly believe if you had to be a Spice Girl, you would definitely be Posh Spice in my books. All right, so no, I'm joking. I talk about this a lot on social media and also on the podcast. There was, when I stopped playing, my career came to an abrupt end. I still wanted to play 2 more years. That was not the case. Struggling to find a contract in France. It was hard, and for me it was tough. With a bit of reflection now, being older and revisiting those periods, and obviously I have to do it for this podcast. Well, I realized there were some dark times for me. It's not always the case for everyone. Everybody see a lot of former players on television do analyzing games, and they think, okay, these guys just had it easy. How did you experience that transition before you got that opportunity to start going to games, following the box, and doing things which you love?
Yeah. See, look, I think it's hard for everybody. I think the joy, I mean, even if you've got a plan and all of that, I think the joy you get out of playing rugby is something that everybody misses. But for me, from a personal point of view, when towards the end of my career, I had a bad Achilles, and you're sort of hanging on. And then I was playing Vodacom Cup. I'd been in the Springboks. I played Super Rugby. Then you sort of then for me, when I actually decided it, I was wrestling with it for about 6 months. And I remember we played that Currie Cup final, and which we lost, I think, 2010 or 11, I think 2011, 11 or 12, I can't remember the year. And then I think I'd known that week that this is it. So I told the guys, I'm done. But when I drove out our high performance set to the HPC in Bellville, I was actually quite relieved in a way, because it's something that you've been wrestling with for a good 6 months. When am I going to stop? Should I stop? What am I going to do? But I'd always, like, and for me, this is important for a lot of players. I'd always wanted, because I never got a contract out of school, so for me, I only got a contract, I think, after we won the under-21 World Cup. It always gave me anxiety, life after rugby. So I actually went to go see, a career counselor. They did all these tests, and they said, this is the role. So I actually worked for an advertising agency
Okay.
for the last 3-4 years of my career. So on my off day, I'd go in and work. They'd give me projects. When we'd go on to have a look here, look at branding, marketing opportunities, etc. I'd report back. And it was a small agency, so they actually helped me quite a bit. So you sort of learn. I'd sit in meetings, go to pitches and all of that. So it just had always given me anxiety. Then the year I stopped playing. So sorry, I'm being long-winded here, but the year, so that was part of that. And then what happened was, when I was at Free State, I used to get sent a lot to Joburg to do all the media stuff, because all the other guys, the Afrikaans guys, don't want to speak English on TV. I mean, so they sent me. And then I sort of started doing that. And then the one of the guys at Super Sports approached me. He said, what you plan after rugby? Look, I'm not really sure yet. I'm working for an advertising agency. He said, listen, would you be keen to possibly join us? So I said, okay, look, I'll think about it. Just said, when you decide to stop, give us a ring. So in between that, I remember when I was a province, and I wanted to move to Boland because it was just before the 2007 World Cup. I don't want to go overseas then, purely because I want to be in the country and try to play my way into the squad. Then they had that whole Fidentia shambles. Then I got injured. So then I started commentating. I started doing Cravenly commentary, a bit of commentary there. And then the one guy, I think after the first game, they said, listen, you've got it. You can do well in this. Just stick with it. Then I did some formal training. But then I went back to playing for Province when Rassi took over as coach. So started doing that. Then about a year before, I phoned Super Sports and guys, chances I'm going to call it end of this season. And the guys said, cool. So then what I did then, 2011, because I remember it was the World Cup, I started doing commentary, and then I went to business school. But because I had done my work experience, they allowed me in for the course. Because, I mean, they said, well, you need 10 years work experience. So I said, listen, guys, I've been working in advertising. I told them my background. So they said, come join, do a course in business school. So I did. I went to business school, and then I was working for Super Sports my first year out of rugby. And I probably learned more that year in business school than I did with rugby. Rugby teaches a lot about working with people. There's a lot of transferable skills, and it helped me through business school, to be honest with you. And there's the reality. I realized that there's also a lot of unhappy people in their jobs. You go to business school, some companies send people, they're not happy. And I just realized how privileged I was to play rugby. There's never a Sunday when I thought, oh, shucks, we got practice the next day. There's always an excitement, butterflies in your stomach. So I realized, the key, I realized how fortunate you play rugby, because you do what you love for so long. It's a dream that you have from when you're a teenager and you live it. And then I love my time at business school, did that. And then obviously then stuck with the commentary, worked in property, and then was also coaching at UCT. So I've been fortunate in terms of that. But the studying aspect for me was important, because you walk into a room, you meet people, you got to understand what you're talking about. And that's what I feel strongly about. For players now, they're so lucky, good for the guys now. You can study online, even on tour. You can get your tutors. You can get so much support, which we didn't have.
Yeah.
We never had that support. The guys now, I think I just trade, that they have these opportunities, they understand that they're fortunate enough to get your qualification over 10 years or whatever it is, or 5 years, get into the workspace, find out what you love, and chase it hard, because it's 10, 15 years of absolute fun and with rugby. But outside of that, you still got the rest of your life to live. And that can make that transition a lot easier for a lot of players.
Well, there's some gems there. Shimmy, what does your day look like? Average day look like now? Then, because it sounds like you could do a lot of things. You sort of everything from the business to property. You got experience advertising. Obviously, you've got all this wealth of knowledge in lots of different areas. What does your average day look like?
Whoa.
Is there such a thing?
It depends what time of the year. Because
he only works for 2 months of the year.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. How's the beach?
No. Obviously, I'm involved in a bit of coaching. One or two business things that I'm looking at. So, like for example, today, I've dropped my kids off. I've got one or two meetings later. We'll pick my daughter up, take her out for an ice cream or whatever.
Some flat white.
Pretty chilled for Then I'm pretty chilled for the rest of the day. But look, it depends how busy the rugby season is. So I do have a lot of flexible time in terms of that. So it's pretty relaxed now. But speak to me in June, July, when I've got to go to New Zealand, come back, and you got to do test matches. So for example, this week we filmed Box Office on Monday. So we sort of do that now, obviously because of the Investec Champions Cup. And then other weeks are busier than others. So some weeks are busier than others.
I'm loving the Box Office, by the way. I'm actually.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. You do, yeah. You guys do, yeah. It's really good. It's also you get these nuggets of information, but also you just get a slight insight into the mindset of some of these champion, coaches and players. Whether it's Jean or Skulk or Nick Mallet. It's so insightful. It's really really good. And how have you found that with the guys? Is that something that's just you guys are just having a chat and it's actually just happened to be filmed? How do you find it all?
Yeah, so initially what happened was there was no podcast for South African rugby. So I don't know, a lot of the English guys were doing it, the Kiwis had a podcast, but there was no one looking at South African rugby. So it started in the World Cup. I think I got a call from one of the guys at World Rugby that said, would you be keen to do this? I've never done a podcast. I've done a lot of TV work in my life, but not a podcasting. So then we started, and what you realize, obviously the first show, I think we over, I don't know, probably 50 shows now. But you start with the first one, you sort of get it going. And I never sort of, during the World Cup, we were just talking about stories, obviously upcoming games, a bit of banter, a bit of chapter, the chemistry was right. And I never realized how good the viewership was because I never checked it. We sort of would do the next one, do the next one, do the next one. And at the end of the World Cup, the guy said, have you ever watched it on YouTube? Some of the guys at World Rugby said, no. I find it embarrassing watching myself. I like even listening to myself on commentary. I actually I don't even do it. I was like, oh, geez, I can't believe I said that or whatever it is. And then they said, listen, you guys were probably one of the most watched podcasts during the Rugby World Cup. I was like, oh, really? Was it? Oh, okay. So then we continued, and then post-World Cup, they asked us if we'd like to continue it. And that's it. So we've got a great following. But the reality is, it's you work with guys you get on well with. The chemistry is right. The guys feel quite relaxed. And then they tell stories. It's day-to-day life. The normal things that people talk about, and people seem to enjoy it, and we're doing something right. So
yeah,
we'll continue with it. But for me, it was quite a nice growth opportunity from the commentary in terms of the media space and moving into the podcast space. So it's a great space to be in. And, people love the stories, and someone might, watch it because they're having a bad day, they want to laugh at something. Some people might watch it for insight and all of that. So if you've got all those touch points and people turn around and say, shucks, I actually enjoyed that, it put a smile on their faces or I learned something, then you're doing something right.
Shimmy, I've got a million questions for you, but I think one of the most important ones is at the moment, what was G like as a roommate? Because I've got some doubts. I've got some doubts. Yeah.
He was the little spoon.
I was the tiny one. My side of the room was always, but he was great. He was great. I've always enjoyed G. We still mates now. He was a great roommate. Look, one thing G had was all the latest technology. whatever it was. It
Oh
was
yeah, I can
he always
imagine.
had the latest tech. It was the what it was, I think PlayStation or Xbox or whatever it is. I remember when G was studying, you're studying law, eh?
Yeah, I missed out on that one, man.
Remember,
No
he'd come with these
online
massive
tutors
pieces
there.
of paper, go through and study, and then have this, and then we'd have Xbox. But the thing is, I've always found with roommates, it's not how much you talk as roommates, it's how much you're comfortable in silence. Like,
Mm.
you'd sit down, Xbox or whatever it is, or have fun together. And sometimes with roommates, you sort of walk out the room and you go to your separate
Yeah.
directions. But Chi and I would always, chat, whatever, always outside of the room, we'd, talk rubbish together. The banter was always good, And I remember where the tradition was that we used to hang our jerseys up, our match jerseys before every game above our
Yeah.
beds before we went to bed. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, G as a roommate. But always bought the entertainment, always had an entertainment budget, Guthrie. So it was good times, it was always good times.
Shimmy,
That's
but
awesome.
if now that I think about it, back then, like you said, we were comfortable in silence, but we had so many great chats as well. Back then, there wasn't
Yeah,
social media.
yeah, that's true.
We had our phones, but like we had Snake. You played Snake
Yeah,
on your Nokia
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah,
You had your Samsung phone. Uh,
You're gonna have
but
to explain to some kids like
oh
listening
man,
what that is, bro.
Ben, one of
I know what
what
it is.
Shimi's not sharing on tour, we had this ritual. So obviously, you're fortunate you got your meals with the team, but for some reason, later in the evening, we had to order a club sandwich from room
yeah,
service, and I had 6 Heinekens, 3 each. We
yeah,
have to be
yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah, cheers.
You
Yeah,
remember
yeah, you
those?
forget those. Yeah. And you always remember the guys would always look, okay, the waiters would be walking to a room with the 6 Heinekens and club sandwiches. Then one of the players would always follow and come knock on the door and deliver it for you.
I
We
think
had Ricky
Jake
January
Oper
moved
gave us
into our room
the
also.
food
Yeah.
one night. I think
Yeah,
Jake
Ricky
actually.
January moved into our room. Remember in Perth. I don't know
Yeah.
who Ricky was rooming with, but he obviously wasn't happy. Then he basically moved into our room. He moved into our room. But it was, yeah, I remember the
We
club
fed him. We
sandwiches.
fed him. We gave him food,
Yeah,
water.
yeah, but I mean, I mean, we actually also you like it when you've got a good generation, and the guys get on well as mates. We always had a crack on tour. It was always the bus trip. You think about how hilarious was that the banter was always world class the whole time. It's funny enough. You remember the games, but you also remember the laughs probably more, and some of the cracks and the touring and the you get to Australia was always good for me because you always by the coast. Always close to the beach. You walk down, you go to Coogee, talk about that hill, but also coffee down the road after the game, a couple of beers, midweek beers, and so on. So that gee, the thing is, G was also a good tourist. In rugby, you either get guys that are good tourists or bad tourists. There's nothing in between. There's no gray area. So the good tourist is the one who get to town, you drop your bags. Let's go meet the locals. Go down to the local, you don't having room service every day. Team dinner, you go out afterwards, but you also put in the hard work on the field, but off the field, you also got to make an effort to go enjoy the town.
You show me. You know the great thing is that coming back to the box office, and I'll just say as a former teammate, it's like I'm there with you in the room. You guys are still exactly the same. Nothing has changed. You guys,
Yeah,
and I think to our audience, what you're seeing that is authentic. That's who they are.
yeah,
What they are sharing. So that's great. That's unbelievable.
yeah. But
Um,
gee, some people watch us and we go at each other and people think, are these guys joking or are they serious? It's like no, that's how we normally talk to each other. Don't worry. That's how we normally talk to each other. But it's gone nice. The chemistry's right, then it's
yeah,
fine. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. And the reality is, I mean, you think about the guys, we're all in our 40s now. We've known each other for good over 20 years.
yeah.
Yeah.
If you think about the relationships, our wives, our kids know each other, all of that. So it's over 20 years of friendship.
Shimmy,
Sure.
it's really funny. It's really funny you should say that, Shimmy,
Yeah.
because that you about going at each other because I was fortunate enough to play a few different places: Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, UK, and coach in a lot of places as well. But with rugby, it's really interesting, and I've worked in football as well. But with rugby, there's generally, and I'd say 95% of the places, there's this honesty where you have this honest feedback where you can be quite direct with people, where you can, and it's not personal. But also there's a humour with it as well often, and it's easy to call somebody out. Like you boys might call each other out, oh Shimmy, you're on time again, are you? Or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
and you're getting called out, but at the same time you don't take it personally, and it's amazing. I've found that a huge lesson from the game where you can just have these direct conversations. They're not personal. You just get better. Everybody wants the team to get better. Everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to improve and grow. It's huge, and now it's universal world over, I think, in rugby.
Yeah. And I think that's how it should be. I think that's probably one of the great skills you do learn from rugby. That's why, you get a lot of, let's say, rugby players that go into corporate and they do well, even though without the experience on, purely because the guys are quite forthright and in a nice way. You can call people out in a nice way. You realize the value of having feedback, the value of having honest conversations, the value of getting to know everybody, not just certain people. So I think there's also a lot of life lessons you learn from rugby, and a lot of transferable skills. You can walk in a room, be confident, not be too arrogant, not to be too cocky, and back yourself, and you've also got the work ethic around, because you know what it's like to be successful and how to work hard and how to get there. So I think there's a lot of important characteristics and thing, and a lot of people like hiring rugby players because you might not have the skills, but the guy's got you might not have the actual the job skills or whatever it is, but he's got the character to learn on the job, to do well, and so on. So I think that's why I think we've been fortunate enough to be involved in this game, and the skills you learn from rugby will last you forever.
Yeah,
Shimmy, we both started at the Cheetahs. I want to go back then, I think, to give people insights. You remember those captain practice braais, having those lamb chops and the pizzas like a day before the game. What was the Cheetah then, back then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Rugby, it's all about performance. And I think players don't get how lucky they are today. And I'm talking about the video sessions. Like, we have players that complain if a video session's more than 25 minutes. Can you take us back to our video sessions back in the day with the Cheetahs, with Rassie? Can you remember those ones?
Yeah, those were long. Look, I think, you think about it now, some of the stuff we did at the Cheetahs, you talk about the lamb chops. We had the carnivore diet before anyone else, I found with the Cheetahs, you actually learned. You look at Jacques Minova, started at Free State, done well coaching. Rassie, you talk about his record. Franco Smith, look how he's done. Brendan Fainter has done well from a coaching point of view. Gee, you've won how many? 2 Champions Cups, I think,
Yeah.
with Laura. So there is a lot of guys that Kennedy Timber is involved at the Bulls, in terms of. But I found we workshopped a lot of things. The video sessions were long, but we workshopped everything. Okay, guys, let's talk about contesting in the 22. What if we do this? What if we do that? Okay, let's look at this. This is what that team does. So we're always well prepared. I still remember those wide moves we used to do, some of the plays we used to do. And some of that, it was almost a bit of ahead of its time. I mean, Rassie, then we were at Free State, but the lights off the rooftop, all the stuff he's doing now with the Springboks, he was doing at Free State. And because we were a small team, and probably, look, we were lucky. If you look at now, I mean, Joan Smith, Andre Fainter, Rassie, yourself, Yanni, Osturant, CJ van der Linde, Kennedy Timber. So we were a talented team. But back then, we were all still young, trying to break through, and we to establish Springbok. So we actually put a lot of hard work into the preparation, and we did bloody well for a team from Bloemfontein. But you think about it now, I think the video said we're actually workshopping everything. The players had buy-in, the players had buy-in. A lot of things that people are doing
those
now.
folders, those big folders.
Yeah, we're doing that when we were playing so over 20 years ago. That was 20 years ago. So in terms of some of the coaching structures and stuff we're doing then, it was probably ahead of its time, for back then, and a lot of the stuff. I learned a lot when I went to Free State, and then Rassie obviously came. I learned from Free State, was successful there, and came to Province, and some of the stuff that some of the processes he implemented, still at Province over 10 years ago. There's a couple of things that are still there, and it just shows how good he was as a coach. But at Free State, those video sessions were heavy. Some of the guys, I remember Rassie would say, look, guys, if you want to go out, go to the toilet, go out, come back in. Whatever it is, but and we're not leaving this room till you come up with a good plan, a good solution, and we implemented it on the field.
Do you remember Tepo? I still remember Tepo Kokali, the fullback.
Anything.
Man, I remember he fell asleep one day, Ben, and we were talking about defense. And Rassi went to Tepo. So Tepo, so what should we be doing there? And Tepo just like put his hand up, like, just take it wide, coach. Just take it wide.
Bishop's Rugby. But I remember when we had a stage once. Remember Brendan Painter was involved for a while
Yeah.
with us. And then we had this thing of doing a bit of contact on a Friday.
Yeah.
And I hated doing contact in practice. I didn't need to go and do contact during the week to prepare for a game. It just, and you and Osterant would just clean each other up. And I'd be sitting at the side with Kennedy Timber. Thinking, if I go that hard, I want to play tomorrow. I'm not doing that much contact. So I still remember those contacts. I was like, it was like 4 or 5 minutes of contact, but the guys would climb in. I was like, guys, this is captain's practice. This is the last one. I'm not getting involved in this mess here. And you just could switch on automatically, and you were climbing into. You guys would go for each other so hard. I'd stand on the wing with Kennedy with the flower, saying, no, this is not my smoke here. These guys can go at each other the whole time. But it was fun times. I mean, I think culturally, when you play rugby for in a small town, and everything's 5 minutes away from each other, naturally, what happens? You all spend time after the game together. The whole town's behind you. You sort of know everybody, so you're actually forced to be together. Which was always good for Free State, and always the underdog, which suited us. It suited our sort of personalities pretty well. Then we were hungry, chasing to obviously try and make the Springboks, but also take down some of the big boys, which he did a couple of times.
When you talk about Rassi, you're talking about Brendan, you talk about Jacques, you're talking about all these legends and these really. It occurs to me there's a real thread through South African rugby, and you could probably put an analysis together of why the Springboks have been successful down the years, that IP and how it stayed in the system. And then, because we had Omar on last week, and we were talking about, I met Omar in 2009 when I visited the Stormers, and at the time, Alistair Coetzee was on the coaching staff, Matthew Proudfoot, Gary Gold, Brendan, Jacques, I think, was still the physio, maybe, and Omar was doing one of his first gigs. Dave Vessels was still in the background doing some analysis. Obviously, Rassi was pulling it all together. You're talking, there's some serious lessons there, and that it's that IP, and it's just stayed in the system. It's been incredible. But when you're talking about stuff you did 20 years ago with Rassi, I mean, it must be weird seeing it now with the Springboks as well, and just seeing it carry on and on.
Yeah, look, I think also with when you look at the Springboks, the bigger picture, you got to look at the support from SA Rugby. They had to make some systematic changes. The selection of overseas players, and what Rassi's done, I think his processes are incredible in terms of managing. How does a player from Japan, from France, from England, from Ireland, and the local South African kids all come together, to be, first of all, physically ready, to be well aligned, to understand what they need to do for the Springboks to perform, putting all that together. And that takes a hell of a lot of work in terms of that within the processes. So you've got that, you've got an organization that's supporting you. So it's all sort of clicked, It didn't start overnight with the Springboks. I mean, now we're sort of in a purple patch and a golden generation, but I think a lot of hard work. You look at the first team that was selected by Rassi, I think was against Wales in America, and how the changes have come through. But he's also had a core group of players that have stuck with, and there's a lot of trust. They understand the system, but I think they also understand for them to stay there, they need to perform. So there's a couple of key appointments. I mean, Alan Walters that came in the beginning, he sorted out the S&C stuff, the conditioning. Of course, South Africa's always had talent. I don't know whether they've been aligned in terms of the conditioning, in terms of about the way he found a South African way, and he found South African solutions for South African problems. So we're always going to have players leaving purely because of the exchange rate and how much money they can make overseas. So Asia going away overseas, or Francois Lowe, open up a gap for someone else to come through the system, and there's another player. So players will always leave, but as long as they come back and that's managed well, I think we'll always be successful.
Yeah. That going overseas thing is really interesting for me, and I think I'm sitting here in England now, having lived in South Africa for 3 years and going back there often, but not obviously being South African, but I admire the way you guys do it. I think it's incredible. Obviously, you're double World Cup winners, back-to-back World Cup winners, or more than double World Cup winners, but it's incredible. And I don't know if it was stumbled upon by with the players going overseas because of the economic situation. But when I see players like Manu Tuolangi going to France, or Jack Willis playing for Toulouse, and all these other players doing really well, English players, and they're not allowed to get selected for their national team, it doesn't help the growth of rugby, I don't think, because we've got some superstars in the game globally, and if we could have them on the world stage, I think England would be in a better place. And I'm not necessarily wearing an English hat, but I think the game would be in a better place.
You want the best players playing against each other.
Yeah.
Look, I think, I mean, we also had the policy of not selecting overseas players, but our situation was maybe different because we got a lot more guys overseas. But it has worked. It has worked for us. I mean, the other day, the Sharks played the Stormers in the 28th of December. I think there was 45,000 people watching. And the Stormers weren't really going well at that stage. I think they were, mid-table in the ERC. 45,000 this last game against Sale. I think they had close to 30,000 people.
Oh.
And that's without a lot of key Springboks. There's no Chevron, Colby, Curtly, Orange. All the big sort of Springboks are overseas, but people are still getting behind it. And maybe it's also because South African rugby has been successful that people are watching. So the debate was, listen, if Pollard is playing against Mani Lebok and the Bulls are playing the Stormers, won't they bring more people in? But the people are still coming in without a lot of the Springboks. So it has worked for us. I'm not sure what would happen if they had that policy in New Zealand, Australia, or in England. But for me, the England thing is quite a bizarre one, because you can jump on a train from Paris to to London. Like I don't know why.
You know what? Yeah, it's funny because, and I won't go off on too much of a tangent, but if I do this, G gives me a sign, Shimmy.
He's gonna geek out.
You're talking about rugby, geeking out rugby too. Bear with me, G. Bear with me, man. I remember seeing, because I was with the Bulls for a tiny bit of time when John Mitchell was there in 2018, and Mani Libok was in the squad, but he wasn't playing, and because he was stuck behind Andre Pollard, and then Andre obviously went on overseas, and Mani I don't think would have developed. He then had to go, to a couple of other teams. He ended up at the Stormers via the Sharks, I think, and then he got a run of games and he got an opportunity. And I love that growth mindset that you guys seem to have in South Africa. And I think the opposite is, and on your point there, Shimmy, about England, it's not about the distance, it's about fear. I think when we batten down the hatches and have a fear mindset, we're going to lose somebody, we're going to create a rule that we can't lose because our league's going to diminish, as opposed to you guys there are saying, like, no, we back the next guy off the rank. We'll back each other. We'll produce the next guy. We got talent. The next kid coming from one of these amazing schools is going to do the job, and then he'll get an opportunity. And then it's up to that guy. If he chooses to play in Europe, he's got to prove himself still worthy. I think you guys have done that so well.
Yeah, look, it has worked. I mean, we like. I mean, G, you'll know. I mean, you both you guys will know. The school structures, I mean, sometimes you watch a schoolboy rugby now, that you've got great athletes, but they still need a lot of coaching and so on. But in terms of the athletes that we are producing, I mean, you look at Jorenza Julius at the Sharks. He was in school 2 years ago. I mean, Sasha, that age group where Sasha came to the Suleiman Hartzenberg at the Stormers, who's doing well. So there is a good group of players, a great group of players coming through, and it happens year in, year out. But I think it's aligning the system. Our junior rugby doesn't do well. If you think about it, we came, I think, 7th in the under 20 World Cup. There's plans to fix all of that, though, I mean, but the reality is, I think what the guys do learn from schoolboy rugby is, I think, to handle the pressure, and you got to work hard to make your first team nowadays. You can't just walk into your first team. There's talent everywhere. So you learn that hard work. You learn to live with the pressure. Gee, you are fortunate enough to play in those derby games as a youngster, and you understand the pressure to play. Everything leads up to that one game a year we need to win right up. So the pressure you learn to live with. That's why I'm not surprised a guy like Pollard, when that moment comes to get that kick over, or that pressure moment comes, he's been doing it since he was 14, 15 years old, and you think about it, he's close to 30 now. So he's been doing it for so long that you actually grow up with that pressure. And that's something that South African rugby probably has a lot of, and the guys get to understand that pretty much.
Well, yeah.
Shimmy, I wanna throw a curveball in here. I want us to change a bit of topic here. I get this question a lot, when we get interviewed during the Champions Cup about the South African teams. Last year I felt that South African teams brought something different to the game. They brought the intensity. Can you give me a bit more information from your side, what you feel the South Africans' mindset is in the Champions Cup, and if they actually value? Because I came to lose back in the day because I wanted to play in the European Cup because I thought it was one of the top champions, and I could be wrong here. I get the impression that some South African teams don't value the Champions Cup as a top tier competition, sometimes sending their second teams or third teams overseas. And that could be linked to having three championships. You got the URC, you got the Champions Cup, and then you also got the Currie Cup as well. Because I saw a brief clip on social media that you guys were touching base on it. Unfortunately, didn't have time to watch the whole episode. But can you give your guys' take on that in terms of South African team mindset in the Champions Cup?
Yeah, look, the guys, I think it was probably a bit, it's a learning, I think we're going through a learning curve in Champions Cup. So we're not used to the long seasons. So it was always Super Rugby was quite short. The first year of URC, when the Bulls and Stormers played, we weren't in the Champions Cup. So all of a sudden we got put in the Champions Cup last year. The squad rotation, a lot of our guys didn't understand it. But I think what's going to happen now, the Champions Cup, probably last year, the South African team probably didn't believe we could win it because the semis away and obviously the final being in Europe and all of that. But I think that mentality is going to change probably from next year. I think guys are starting to realize, you look at Toulouse, what they did, that helped a lot. I mean, you came with La Rochelle and we put out, but I think it's their away game. So what South African teams have done is, let's say the Stormers had a game, they're playing let's say it's Racing Metro this weekend, and we're playing the Bulls next weekend. Chances are they would have sent their reserves to play against the Racing Metro team and the main team to play against the Bulls because they want to win that derby game, obviously. And that's probably the way that mentality needs to change. To say, guys, let's chase this Champions Cup. Because, I mean, we were talking about it, I think on Box Office, that to get that star, on your jersey, to be the first South African team to get that star, no one can take that away from you. And that's got to be the chase. That's got to be the be all and end all. And I think that mentality is going to change. Also, I think what's going to happen is the experience of players that you're going to sign. So two really strong squads, so you don't have that problem anymore. And that's what's happened. So Team Gaza sent teams overseas that haven't really done that well. But I think that's going to change though. So I think guys are starting to realize that the Champions Cup is the holy grail in world rugby, and that's the one worth chasing.
Thanks, Jimmy. That's super interesting. G, have you got another question about that?
Yeah. I just wanted to follow up because I know Shimi is a busy man, seeing that he's not flexible at all in his scheduling during the day. I just wanted to ask you, Shimi, obviously you get to follow the box, and my question is that is there any players that really impress you that you can say, listen, yeah, obviously we're not just talking from a skill point of view and what we see of the field, but just in terms of their work ethic and who do I know? I know a lot of players, everyone in that environment they work on, but is there someone in that team that you said, listen, yeah, this guy is on another level, is on another planet? Is there some insights you can share with us with the Springbok team?
Yeah, look, generally, I mean, you obviously, I don't see the guys in the gym, but Curtly Orange, I remember when he wasn't starting, I'd go to gym, like in New Zealand, you go to gym or whatever, I'd always bump into him in the gym. I'd always see him walking in the gym, doing the extras and all that, especially when he wasn't in the team. But I just think that environment pushes for high performance because obviously the changes that they've made, there'll never be a drop in standard. But I always look at the guys, the best position in a rugby team is when you number 1 to 15. It's the guys that are outside of that. This last tour now, Cameron Anakom, the young loose forward, I think he got his test debut as well. He was always doing extra fitness because I think he realized that maybe he might not get a chance, but if he does get it, he must be ready. So I'd always see him going up and down, doing fitness, doing extra runs, and so on. There's Jesse Krill's obviously physically he's in great shape. He obviously works very hard, but for me it's always the guys that you see sort of outside of it. Obviously with the Stormers, I see Willemse works slightly hard. Remember Siabelo Sinatra, the wing for the Stormers. He came back from injury, but the training ethic from that guy is next level. So I always look at the guys that are out the mix that are working hard are the guys for me that you really want to see, because that shows a lot of hunger and desire. You know, you're not dropping your head, but realizing that when the chance comes, I've got to make sure I'm ready.
Thanks, Jimmy. You know what's really occurs to me listening to both of you is, a lot of P times G talks about the physical stuff, work ethic. We've spoken about that, but that's almost a given, isn't it? I think if you're talking about someone who's a Springbok rugby player, that's almost a given, the physical stuff. But you both have really strong mindsets. When I think of G, your story, leaving part, or even that Paul, and then going to Bloom 1,000 Ks away and having to adjust, having to assimilate into that environment, running to training, all those types of things you have spoken about before publicly. Shimmy, the stuff you've shared with us today, leaving home at 5, that's incomprehensible for people in the UK. That's just, no, seriously, but people don't see that. Now, I guess there is a question and there isn't a question. First of all, thanks for sharing everything, because the lessons from the game, I see this mindset, this resilience, this mental resilience from both of you. And it's probably common in a lot of the South African players because of the depth of competition, the desire to represent their country and actually have that higher purpose, I think, in doing that. But did you do anything to develop and also that adaptability you spoke about, to go to different environments, get on with different people, that's transferable to other, whatever you do after rugby? I guess the question is both to both of you. Did you guys do anything to develop that mental resilience, that mindset, or was it just, this is the circumstance and I had to develop this mindset because of the circumstance to survive and then thrive?
Gee, would you want to answer first or myself?
You always want a slow thinker.
No, but I think it was just I think you put into that circumstance. I'm not. I think I mean I still. Interesting. I've got a WhatsApp group and there's about 6 or 7 of us, and we're the first kids in boarding house, and we've known each other for over 35 years. And it's like, it's bizarre, and we all became tight buddies. We've all gone our different paths, but we're all still mates now. But I think you put into that circumstance, and there's good times, there's bad times. You got to push. It's a lot of things happen when you're a boarder or in boarding house, whatever. Sometimes you got to survive. You got to look after yourself. You know, you learn a lot of lessons. So I think as part of that, you never feel like you surviving. You sort of enjoy it, but you always find a way to get through things. You find a way. You understand what's required, and you almost always in competitive environments. If I might say, not even on the sports field, off the sports field. Your parents send your way. There's a certain responsibility that you got to do well academically. You got to make the most of your opportunities. When you're in school, guys, talk about trying to make the 18. So you always competing. You're always competing, and that sort of builds that resilience, that mindset of that dedication or that determination to always trying to be your best.
Yeah, I think if I can add on there to Shimmy, Ben, I think there's so many things that go on in our lives. We're all different, and we talk about Shimmy going to boarding school, but I take myself going to a hostel for the first time in Bloemfontein. And taking into consideration, our political history in the country, we all experienced it differently. But I was only one of 3 people of color back in at hostel. There were some things that I experienced. It wasn't tough, and I just had to remind myself, why am I here? What I want to spoke about, that higher purpose of what we want to achieve, and also that responsibility towards our family. But I'll never forget, Ben, and this is something actually I forgot. Actually, but actually came up now. Came back to me speaking to Shim. I haven't thought about this in more than 10 years. But I was selected to play for the Cheetahs to start, and I'll never forget. It's probably one of my most embarrassing moments as a rugby player. I was supposed to start, and then the coach back then, he said, "Sorry, G's no longer starting this game because he needs to be on the bench because otherwise we wouldn't get the quota right." And for those who are listening, the quota back in the days in South Africa, you had to have a certain amount of players of color starting or playing or benching or on the field at the same time. But that moment, it came back to hearing that voice of my dad saying, "Son, if you want to achieve something, you got to work 10 times harder than anybody else." And it comes down to Shimmy, you get put into that situation. and being driven by that higher purpose, you will find a solution. If you're really driven by that higher purpose, you will find a solution, you will find that plan, and you will just keep on pushing forward. So that's my 2-7. I've spoken about that in years, but that just came up and
Yeah,
that just happened.
Yeah, thanks for
yeah.
sharing, Gus. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for sharing. I know so maybe it's hard to
Ben, we
remember
need
that
to
one.
close this down because otherwise you go. Shimmy's got a hectic day. He has to have flat
No,
whites. He has to have waffles. He has to go for
Enjoy the
ice
sunshine,
cream. He has to
sunshine
enjoy
in
the
Cape
sunshine.
Town.
I gotta enjoy the
Jesus Christ.
sunshine, yeah.
I know you got
Gotta go
a
to the
question. What
beach.
else, Shimmy, before we
Yeah,
end off?
Shimi, I guess to wrap it up, is there one rugby lesson or a lesson from the game that you've learned that you apply in your life now? Is there something that stands out for you?
You gotta do what you love, man. That's my thing, you know. I did it through rugby. I'm enjoying. I love what I do at the moment. I don't feel like when I do commentary or the media stuff or the coaching or anything that I'm doing a job. I'm doing what I love, you know, and that's the key. There's life's too short to be walking on a Monday and not feeling like you want to do something. So if you do what you love, you'll be happy, you'll be passionate about it, and you'll succeed. And then all the rewards come in after that. So that's the big thing. I think I've always done what I've loved, and I've always had fun with whatever I'm doing. And if I can't do something with a smile in the heart, then I really lose interest. There are tough times and all of that, but you got to do what you love, and you'll be honest, you'll be truthful, you'll put your best foot forward if you want to, you know, if you do what you love, and that's one big thing. That's one thing I've been fortunate about. I love every trip I go on, and then I go on tour and you commentate, and you're in the commentary box, or you're interviewing someone, or there's a new schoolboy star and you're commentating, and you watch them making the Springboks a couple of years later and all that. There's a certain amount of joy. You think, geez, what a journey this guy's got on. You see his parents in the stands and all that. And you take so much joy out of it. So for me, it's find out what you love and you chase it as hard as you can.
That's
Awesome.
great.
Thanks.
That's great advice.
Thanks for
Thank
that,
you.
Shimmy. Guys, I want to thank you guys for this unbelievable chat, this unbelievable conversation. Shim, it was great going down memory lane. And for those of you who are listening to or watching our podcast, please help us grow this show so we can get some unbelievable guests in here. And mate, it was a privilege sharing this with you. It was great, another memory made, and chatting with you. So thank for taking time in your hectic schedule in between the flat whites, the waffles, and the full South African breakfast. Guys, like and subscribe our show. We would appreciate that. And we will speak to you guys soon.